Pedro Pascal's fingers were just brushing the last crunchy shell of his taco when the world around him convulsed in a dizzying whirl of light and sound that didn't belong in this late-night Taco Bell or anywhere he'd ever been. 1 second he was casually chatting with the cashier, an oddly familiar woman with a sharp pixie cut and a mischievous glint in her eye, and the next, the fluorescent lights above flickered wildly, casting warped shadows that seemed to bend and ripple like liquid metal. The aroma of seasoned beef and nacho cheese was abruptly drowned out by an unsettling silence, thick and heavy, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Pedro's heart hammered against his ribs, a chaotic rhythm of awe, disbelief, and rising panic. His mind scrambled for sense. Was this some elaborate prank? An elaborate hallucination? He blinked, only to find the garish Taco Bell signs replaced by faded neon that read, Mr. Taco, and a world washed in the hazy glow of grainy 1980s streetlights. Cars with boxy designs rolled past, and the muffled crackle of a boombox somewhere down the street seemed to anchor this surreal reality. The air smelled different, more synthetic, colder somehow, and the people around him wore clothes that looked ripped straight out of a time capsule, their faces a mixture of confusion and suspicion as they glanced at Pedro's modern hoodie and worn jeans. He was utterly alone yet inexplicably out of place, a time-traveling tourist stranded in an era that predated even his earliest memories. The shock settled deep into his bones, pushing him between thrill and terror. Every instinct screamed to run, but a part of him, his trademark blend of boldness and curiosity, nudged him to stay, to understand what had just torn him from 2025 to 1983 in the blink of an eye. Beside him, the cashier, now clearly not just an employee but some kind of guide or guardian, this stranger named Maggie, offered a calm yet cryptic smile, her eyes glinting with secrets Pedro was desperate to unravel. "Welcome back," she said softly, and that simple phrase twisted the knife of mystery even deeper, planting the seeds of a journey that would challenge everything Pedro thought he knew about time, destiny, and himself. The world outside swirled in a strange, eerie calm, like the eye of a temporal storm, leaving Pedro suspended between disbelief and a reluctant acceptance, caught in the cusp of a story far bigger than a late-night taco run, and his pulse raced, mind aflame with questions that burned hotter than any flame-grilled taco could ever have. As the surreal calm of 1983 began to settle into a textured reality around Pedro Pascal, the initial shock slowly receded but left a gnawing restlessness, a tug at his core that refused to be ignored. Blinking away lingering disbelief, he locked eyes with Maggie, whose enigmatic smile now carried the weight of unspoken warnings and uncharted paths, and together they stepped out onto the cracked pavement, the glow of neon signs flickering like ghostly beacons guiding them deeper into a world that felt both alien and hauntingly familiar. Pedro's mind raced, oscillating between the desperate urge to find a way back home and an insatiable curiosity about how this strange temporal rift had pulled him into a decade he barely knew but now had to navigate. And though his instincts screamed caution, his adventurous spirit pushed him forward with a calculated boldness, each step weighed with both hope and uncertainty. They moved through the streets, Maggie pointing out subtle anachronisms. A gas station that wasn't supposed to exist, a local diner where the jukebox seemed to hum with coded messages, and a bulletin board plastered with flyers about events that defied the timeline Pedro thought he understood. Clues, perhaps, or traps laid by forces beyond comprehension. With every corner turned, Pedro battled an internal storm, the creeping fear of never returning home, the loneliness of being a temporal stranger, and the flicker of doubt about trusting Maggie, whose cryptic guidance sometimes felt like a tether and other times a leash. Their quest quickly collided with physical obstacles too, curious onlookers who eyed Pedro's anachronistic attire with suspicion, a local cop whose relentless gaze suggested he was more than a simple lawman, and the ever-looming presence of shadowy figures lurking in alleyways, their intentions obscured but palpably threatening, as if the very fabric of this timeline was policing itself against disruptions. Just as Pedro's confidence teetered on the brink of faltering, they were joined by a wiry tech-savvy teenager named Dex, whose knowledge of makeshift electronics and underground networks introduced a glimmer of hope. Dex's quick wit and rebellious streak resonated with Pedro's own defiance, creating an uneasy but vital alliance forged in the crucible of confusion and danger. Yet even as they shared whispered strategies beneath flickering street lamps, the psychological weight bore down relentlessly. Each revelation peeled back more layers of an impossible puzzle, forcing Pedro to confront the fragility of identity and time itself, while Maggie's cryptic past seemed to entwine with his fate in ways he couldn't yet grasp. The night stretched endlessly ahead, thick with fog and uncertainty, the city whispering secrets only half heard, and as Pedro took a tentative breath, ready to dive deeper into the unknown, the chill of the air seemed to carry a warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed, and in chasing answers, he might just unravel more than the timeline. He might lose himself completely. The night had deepened into a heavy stillness that pressed against Pedro Pascal and his unlikely allies like the weight of a closing noose, each breath drawn as if it might be the last before the storm. In a dimly lit backroom of an abandoned warehouse, they gathered their scant but vital resources. A handful of crude electronic devices Dex had jury-rigged to disrupt temporal frequencies. A faded but potent relic that Maggie insisted held the key to stabilizing the wormhole, and Pedro's own resolve, sharpened by the countless uncertainties and betrayals that had carved away at his confidence but never extinguished his fire. As they huddled over maps and cryptic notes, voices low but urgent, the full shape of the antagonist revealed itself like a dark shadow peeling away from the night. An entity known only as the Chronarch, a spectral embodiment of time's fury and order, whose existence was woven into the very fractures Pedro had stumbled through, a being bent on preserving the sanctity of the timeline by erasing anomalies, like Pedro himself, with ruthless precision. The Chronarch's power lay in its near-omniscience, able to anticipate moves before they were made and manipulate time loops to trap foes in endless cycles of fear and despair. But beneath that impenetrable facade flickered a rare vulnerability, its need to maintain a core temporal nexus, a fragile point in the city where past and future bled together, and where the barrier between realities was thinnest. Recognizing this, Pedro and his team crafted a desperate gambit, to lure the Chronarch into the heart of the Nexus using a decoy signal generated by Dex's devices, while Maggie would attempt to use the relic to sever its connection to the flow of time long enough for Pedro to strike at its core essence with a tool forged not from technology, but from raw human will and memory, Pedro's own identity, twisted and tempered by the surreal journey he'd endured. The air was thick with tension as they made their final preparations, each choice heavy with consequence. Should they fail, the timeline might collapse into chaos, erasing not only their existence but countless others. Yet hesitation was a luxury none could afford, and Pedro's heart thrummed with a fierce clarity, the sum of all his fears, hopes, and determination coalescing into a single, unyielding purpose. As the first hints of dawn crept into the horizon, painting the sky with uncertain light, the team exchanged brief, resolute glances. The calm before the storm was fragile but necessary, a fleeting moment to steel themselves for the inevitable clash where time itself would be both weapon and battlefield, and where every heartbeat could tip the scales between salvation and oblivion. As the first tendrils of dawn bled into the city's shadowed streets, Pedro, Maggie, and Dex stepped cautiously into the heart of the temporal nexus, a fractured, surreal zone where reality seemed to ripple and warp like a disturbed pond, ready to confront the full, terrifying force of the Chronarch, whose presence twisted the very air with an oppressive, otherworldly chill that seemed to siphon the breath from their lungs and drag time into a slow, suffocating spiral. The final confrontation was not merely a battle of physical might but a harrowing collision of wills and perception, where every step could unravel their sanity and every hesitation might mean eternal erasure. The Chronarch's voice, a haunting chorus of echoes from all ages, filled their minds with visions of failure and oblivion, trying to unravel Pedro's grip on his own fractured memories, turning him against the very identity he clung to, the essence that, paradoxically, was both his shield and the key to defeating the ancient force. As Dex manipulated his devices to hold the Chronarch's looping manipulations at bay, Maggie focused on the relic, chanting an ancient incantation that shimmered with fragile hope. But the price of this defense was steep. Each second tethered to the relic drained her life force, her strength waning as if she were tethered to the ticking heart of the very time she sought to protect. Pedro found himself standing on the precipice of an impossible choice. sacrifice Maggie's fading vitality to seize a fleeting chance at victory, or risk everything in a desperate gambit that could condemn them all to oblivion? In that crucible of fear and resolve, Pedro summoned the totality of his journey, the fears he had faced, the bonds he had forged, the unyielding spark of hope that had refused to be extinguished, and with a raw, unfiltered roar of defiance, he reached into the Nexus with nothing but his own fractured self, a living memory forged through time, and pierced the Chronorca's temporal core. The shattering blow unraveled the spectral menace, dissolving its grasp and freeing the timeline from its strangling grip, but not without cost. Maggie collapsed into Pedro's arms, her life ebbing away like a candle flickering in a fierce wind, and Dex, battered but alive, locked eyes with Pedro, the weight of sacrifice etched deep into their souls. As the first light of morning cleansed the city streets, the Nexus stabilized, reality knitting itself back into a fragile coherence, yet the world they returned to was irrevocably changed, a place where the ripples of their battle echoed silently beneath the surface of everyday life, a testament to the invisible war waged between time and those brave enough to challenge it. Pedro, forever marked by the ordeal, carried the quiet scars of a man who had touched eternity and returned, humbled and resolute, understanding now that time was not a chain but a tapestry, fragile, complex, and deeply personal. Though Maggie was gone, her sacrifice became a beacon, a silent promise that the fight for the future was never in vain. Dex, once a reckless youth, grew into a guardian of forgotten knowledge, their alliance unbreakable, forged in the crucible of shared trials. The story closed not with finality, but with the humbling truth that every end is also a beginning, and that the bravest journeys are those taken into the unknown, armed with nothing but the hope of changing the course of fate. And as you turn the page on this tale, remember that the adventure never truly ends. There are always new mysteries to unravel, new worlds to explore, and new heroes rising in the shadows of time. So if you've enjoyed this journey through the folds of history and heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that push the boundaries of imagination, because the next adventure is always just around the corner, waiting to unfold.